Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed and on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. 15 hours.
Amateur Traveler, episode 146. Today, the Amateur Traveler goes to Dominica. Learn about this island nation in Caribbean, discovered by Columbus that he still might recognize, and home of some of the best scuba diving in the world. Today on the Amateur Traveler. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into the interview, I do have 3 news stories for you today. You might have already heard about this story, but a family who were bound for a week's holiday in Lanzarote are back home after a check-in desk mix-up meant they caught a flight to Turkey instead. Charles Corey and his wife, Tanya, and their 9-year-old daughter did not realize the mistake until they landed, and a hostess said, "Welcome to Turkey." They were issued the wrong boarding passes by a ground handler working at the Cardiff airport in England last Sunday morning. That's not the best way to start your vacation. And then this is a story that those of you who have fear of flying may just want to skip over. The 346 passengers cruising at 2,900 feet Friday on a Qantas jumbo jet heard a big explosive bang. Oxygen mask dropped, the plane rapidly descended as debris flew through the cabin, and suddenly a hole appeared in the floor. A hole the size of a small car was ripped into the Boeing 747's metal skin and penetrated the fuselage. Last I heard, they were still investigating what happened. And then if adventure tourism was what you like, you might be interested in knowing that Iraq has opened an airport aimed at tourism. I'm not kidding you. And that's a little too adventuresome for me. For more information on all of these stories, check out the links in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Eddie from Florida, who's come to talk to us about the island country of Dominica. Eddie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We had a little trouble getting Eddie on a connection that had good sound quality, but it sounds like we've mastered that. First of all, where is Dominica? Because I had to look this one up.
Dominica is in a group of islands known as the Lesser Antilles. which is right up in there in that chain of islands where Barbados and various other countries such as Antigua, St. Lucia are, that little tiny chain of islands in the southeastern Caribbean.
So what led you to Dominica? Why Dominica?
Well, we'd been looking into Dominica for a while then because I try to travel once a year. We'd heard that Dominica had some of the greatest diving in the Caribbean, but was not overrun with tourism like almost all of the other islands are.
Okay. And how did you plan your trip?
Largely, we used the internet and travel books. There are not that many travel books on Dominica. It doesn't have as much tourism, so your options on travel books were somewhat limited. But we also looked at various sites such as visit-dominica.com, and we used Wiki Travel as well. And we made some phone calls and called the hotels and had seen what all there was to do and what we needed to bring.
Okay. Now, Dominica is not a very big island, so I would normally ask people about their itinerary, but I don't know if that's an appropriate question or if we're talking about an island that's too small that your itinerary is you go to Dominica.
Well, there is a lot to do on the island. It is small. It is about 5 by 5 miles.
Oh, wow. Okay, even smaller than I realized. Okay.
Yes.
So you stayed in one place?
Yes, we stayed in the capital, Rousseau.
And from Rousseau, I'm guessing, and I haven't done my homework here, that Dominica was a French colony.
It was briefly, but a couple hundred years ago it was taken over by the English, which is why English is their official language and is spoken by everyone. Everyone does speak a kind of French Creole there, but everyone I knew also spoke English.
Okay. And so you say that the scuba diving is what attracted you in large part to Dominica. So let's talk about that first. Was the diving as good as you were told?
Yes, it was truly amazing. There were walls that dropped down hundreds of feet. There were all kinds of beautiful coral and fish. Just a gorgeous, unspoiled reef environment.
Anything that particularly stands out from that experience that would make Dominica?
Yes, we were essentially the only divers on the boat. We bought a package where it included 2 dives a day on a boat, and we were the only tourists on that boat.
Oh, wow.
So we largely do pretty much what we wanted.
Was that true of tourism in general on the island? Did you find that it is relatively undiscovered?
Relatively, yes. In fact, 2 things that are said about it is it's called the Nature Island of the Caribbean, and it was often remarked by the locals that out of all the islands that Columbus had visited, this would be the only one he would still recognize today.
Interesting. What else stands out for you for highlights of your trip?
Well, the rainforests were very gorgeous. Over 60% of the island is forested. So you'll see some gorgeous forests, and there's over 300 rivers. And they've actually
300 rivers in 5 by 5 miles.
Yes.
Okay, so quite tropical, quite a lot of rain.
Yes. I did not encounter too much rain, but it is very tropical.
I'm getting the impression if it's getting that much rain that it has mountain peaks in the middle?
It's all mountain.
Okay, all right.
Yes, it is. It's largely volcanic.
Got it.
So there are mountains everywhere.
Interesting.
It's a very, very, very hilly country.
Did you do a lot of hiking when you were there also, or did you mostly spend your time down at the beach and in the water?
We did do some hiking, yes. In fact, they have a long hike. It's about 12 miles in total to the second largest boiling lake in the world. It's a long trek through the rainforest. You have to hire a guide to go with you. You go through it and you eventually come to the second largest lake. It's very beautiful.
You say you have to hire a guide, so it's a preserve then?
Yes, it is. And the main reason you can still go, but the best suggestion to hire a guide is you would probably need one to help you find it because, you're going up and down hills and across various areas.
Okay.
And since a large majority of the island is forested, you could get lost.
A lot of wildlife on the island?
One thing, it's safe though because there are no poisonous snakes or insects there, but on their flag, in fact, is a very unique parrot that is indigenous to that island.
Interesting.
All kinds of tropical birds.
Of the things that you learned about in your research, anything that you were recommended from, you said you didn't have that much of guidebooks from the websites or the other research you did, that didn't really live up to the expectations?
That didn't really live up to the expectations. Not really all that much because there was so much to see on the island.
Okay. We normally ask what the other tourists missed. They missed all of Dominica in this case. What would you recommend as, say, the top 3 things that you really ought to see or do this while you're in Dominica?
Okay, you definitely must go diving while you're there.
Okay.
And you should also definitely take a hike through the rainforest, preferably to the Boiling Lake.
Okay.
And a third thing would be to see the rivers and waterfalls there,
Okay.
because they have over 100 different waterfalls.
Interesting. Okay. Where did you stay, or where would you recommend to stay?
We stayed at the Fort Young Hotel, which was an old fort. It was largely ruined and it's been rebuilt into a hotel. They have someone right there on property who will help you out if there's anything you want to do in the area. They'll give you information.
Is that an expensive, inexpensive stay, or?
It varies on where you stay. Some rooms are cheap. Some rooms are a little bit pricier. I mean, it's going to have a bit higher price because your options are not as wide as in the more developed countries for tourism purposes.
How did you get to the island?
Well, we flew from Orlando to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then we got on a smaller plane and flew from there to Dominica.
Okay. And while you were in Dominica, you mentioned the hike, but how else did you get around?
We rented a car, but I will say right now that that is not for everybody because, like I said, it's very mountainous, and so the roads are incredibly narrow, and they twist and turn, and they're like 200-foot drop-offs off the side, so it can kind of take a little bit of nerves of steel if you're close because the locals fly by them very fast. We had to pull over. As a matter of fact, we used our brakes so much we literally could smell them after a while.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And also, it's English-based, so they drive on the left side.
Okay. That actually reminds me that of one warning you would give besides the driving about Dominica.
It's very, very hot.
Okay.
But, of course, it's a Caribbean country, so you just dress accordingly. Make sure you bring plenty of water. But all in all, you do not need to be worried about safety. It is probably the safest country in the Caribbean.
Best day you had?
Best day I had? That would have to be a very tough one because there's just so many amazing things about the island. You just can't really choose just one thing that you like the most.
Could you give us a top 10, or how far would we get before we ran out? We mentioned top 3.
Yes, the diving. There's also the people. The people are very wonderful.
Okay.
They like talking with you. You can see the culture. And like I'd said, it's a very safe country. I walked around on the streets alone at night. So I think last time I heard they only had like literally 2 people in their jail.
Okay.
Also, another thing that was really amazing was a visit to the Carib village, which is populated by the Carib Indians who had lived on the island before it was conquered.
Okay.
And on certain days, they'll do traditional Carib dances for you to go out there and see. And they also sell handmade baskets, which are very nice.
Okay.
And, of course, even if you're not a diver, there's a lot of snorkeling to do in the area. There's an area called Scott's Head, which is kind of like a round crater filled with saltwater part of the ocean. It has a drop-off of 165 feet, and it's a marine preserve, so it's very well preserved, and it's right next to a fishing village. And you can go around, you can go snorkeling there and interact with some people, try some local foods.
Okay. What kind of local food do you recommend?
My personal favorite was the stewed goat.
Okay.
It was basically just what it was. It was kind of stewed goat. They have different flavored rices, too. Some of it more spicy. It's difficult to describe. What they've told me, it was traditional Creole food.
That's what it sounds like. Okay. What do you wish you'd known before you went to the island?
I wish we had a little bit more understanding about maybe some of the roads because the roads are very limited. There have not been that many detailed maps.
Okay.
You may see a turn somewhere, and it's not on the map, but you're not sure if that's part of the road or not, or if it veers off somewhere else.
Okay.
Because it's so mountainous, the roads are very limited.
So it might even be a good place for a GPS, it sounds like.
It would help, definitely.
Okay. Anything else you wish you had known before you went?
Not really much else. Yes, I wish I had known that on my last 2 days I wouldn't have been there when that hurricane hit. That kind of ruined my last couple days.
How close did the hurricane get?
I think it went over us. It was last year in August. There was a little hurricane that went through the area and ended up going into, I believe, the Yucatan.
Okay. So it was still forming at the time it went over Dominica.
Yeah, from what I remember, it was basically a Category 2, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
I think, but they'll hold me on that. I'm not 100% sure. But I'm from Florida, so to me, hurricanes are like nothing.
All right,
I laugh at those Category 2s.
Interesting. Let's see, a Category 2 is like at least like 70-mile-an-hour winds if I'm getting my hurricane categories right, but I'm from California, so I wouldn't swear to that.
It might have been a Category 2, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. The most memorable person you met?
Most memorable person? I have to say he was the guy who I met earlier on before we had our vehicle. He gave me a drive up to the Carib village.
Mm-hmm.
He was very knowledgeable. It's a good idea to do that at least once because they'll tell you a lot of different things about the island, about the people, about the culture. He'd mentioned what their economy was largely dependent on. And while we were driving, we actually coincidentally were right behind the Prime Minister at one point.
Okay. And you rented a driver and car, or this was a taxi?
I just hired a taxi, yes.
You hired a taxi, okay. And when you say right behind, the Prime Minister was in the car ahead of you?
Yes, for a little bit. He turned, we kept going straight. But yes, he actually pointed that out to me. I guess the license plate, that's the Dominican flag.
Okay.
And actually, I just remembered, it is pronounced Dominica.
Oh, okay. I've been saying it wrong here. Dominica.
Yeah,
okay.
I have to, so don't worry. In Latin, Dominica means Sunday.
Oh, okay. Sure. Do you have any idea why the island got named that? Discovered on a Sunday, or?
On the day it was discovered by Christopher Columbus.
Okay. All right. Interesting. What was the biggest surprise?
Well, the biggest surprise was just how untouched the island was in terms of tourism. Like I mentioned earlier, it's over 60% of it is forested. While you're driving from the airport to the town, you'll just see swaths of gorgeous rainforest. And you'll also notice, how safe it is, how friendly the people are. When you think the Caribbean, you think more along the lines of like the all-inclusive hotels you might find on the larger islands, Jamaica. When you go to Dominica, you see truly another side of the Caribbean that many, including myself, didn't believe existed anymore.
I think you started to say earlier, and I may have cut you off, what is the population of the island? How many people there?
There are around 70,000 people.
Okay, so it's still rather a lot of people for a 5x5 island.
Yes, population is largely condensed.
Mm-hmm. Any other highlights of the island as we start to wrap this up? It's a small island, so this won't be a long show.
Well, I will say this. There are some, but there are not that many sandy beaches because of the fact that it's a volcanic island.
Mm-hmm.
But you can find them, and there's actually black sandy beaches like the ones in Hawaii.
Sure.
Well, there is something else, actually. They filmed a scene in Pirates of the Caribbean 2, The Dead Man's Chest.
Uh-huh.
Have you seen that movie?
I have indeed.
Okay. Well, at the beginning of the movie, when Jack Sparrow is held captive by those Indians...
Oh, sure, okay.
And when he escaped before being eaten, that scene was filmed in Dominica. And actually, you can visit some of the sets and some of the areas that they had filmed at if you talk with the concierge.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, then that gives us a much clearer picture of what we're talking about for the island. Interesting. What was the quintessential moment that really defined the trip for you, besides the hurricane?
When I went underwater, I would have to say.
Okay.
I mean, when I went under, you have excellent visibility, and you see just how clean the water is.
Mm-hmm.
You just see all the gorgeous reefs and all kinds of areas. I mean, I'm from Florida, so I go diving here, but over there is just truly gorgeous. I believe it was ranked, actually, in a diving magazine, the second greatest dive destination in the world.
Interesting. What ranked first?
A small island off the coast of Malaysia. And the third was actually a place I've been as well, Utila, off the coast of Honduras.
Any surprise encounters while you were diving?
Yes, we ran into several sea turtles.
Okay.
Of course, we ran into those cleaner fish, which I always like to put my hands up to them and have them clean my hands. If you can hold them still enough. These are little tiny, I don't remember the name, but they're little blue.
Okay.
And they go around and they clean fish. They'll even swim inside their mouths and clean inside their teeth.
Okay.
And if you can hold your hands still enough, sometimes they'll come up and, run along your hands.
As we go to wind this down, what 3 words would you use to summarize Dominica?
Dominica, well, ecology,
okay,
nature, and diving, I would have to say.
Okay.
It's truly a nature island like they say it is. If you like to go on eco trips, but you don't want that much tourism developed and you want someplace that's unspoiled and safe too, then I would definitely recommend going to Dominica.
Any last thoughts if somebody else is going to do this kind of trip that you did? What else should we know?
Do your research, but you'll have a lot of help if you stay at the Fort Young Hotel, which they'll give you any kind of help you need. You can rent a car if you choose to, or you can hire a taxi. Of course, I will say both of which will probably be a bit higher, mainly because fuel on the island is expensive.
Okay.
When I went back in August, it was around $5 a gallon equivalent.
Okay.
But their currency is incredibly useful because it's good on several islands. It's the Eastern Caribbean dollar, so it's good on Antigua, Barbuda, St. Lucia, all kinds of islands. It actually is written down on the back of the currency.
Well, Eddie, thanks so much for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about Dominica.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could contribute.
And this episode is sponsored by Budget Rental Car. Save $30 off a weekly rental or 10% off any order by going to budget.com/travel, or check out my other affiliate links at amateurtraveler.com/affiliates. I have one internet resource that I spotted for you that is a different one. Basically, the idea of vocation vacations is that for your vacation, you try out a job. As I said, this is a little different, but if you're interested in making a job change, I don't know much about this company, but it might be something to look into. The idea is that you can try out your dream job for 3 days with a mentor. Now, I don't know if that works if your dream job is being a brain surgeon, but you might check it out, vocationvacations.com. In community news, I should tell you I am probably not likely to have a show on August 16th, as I will be at the New Media Expo, the Podcasting Expo, talking to other podcasters about the art of podcasting. In community news, Eric wrote in and said, I really enjoyed the podcast about Ireland. I really appreciate all the work you put in the podcast. I look forward to my Monday drive to work so I can listen to the podcast that was new on Saturday. How many times do you hear someone say they look forward to driving to work on Monday? Well, Eric, I think practically never. Jason wrote in with the following question. My name is Jason. I'm a 22-year-old male from Wisconsin looking to make a life experience with some buddies of mine for a graduation present to ourselves, guys trip. We want to backpack around Europe in the spring of '09. None of us have ever been to Europe before and most likely never will again, but no promises. We have the basis of the trip mapped out. 1 to 2 months over there is what we're planning. Places we really want to see: Prague, Berlin, London, Paris, Amsterdam, Bruges, Florence, and Rome, and a few unlisted in between. The main thing we want to know is how much are we going to need to bring along to spend? I have read that 100 to 150 US dollars a day is good, but what about the exchange rate being as bad as it is now? And what other small factors could we be missing out that are not calculated in, not including your rail and flight? What is the average price for lodging? Hostels are completely fine with us. We're not on a tight budget, but we can't spend near 10 grand either. Thanks so much for your podcast. Best travel information on the web. Well, thanks, Jason. And I wrote a more detailed reply to Jason, and I'll link to that in the show notes and the discussion boards if you want to add your comments. One thing I suggested is he might consider going from west to east, starting with London, which is going to be the biggest sticker shock, and then heading towards Eastern Europe, which is going to be less expensive, just so that the end of the trip isn't the big surprise from a budgeting standpoint. You can always spend more, but it's a little harder to spend less if you run out of money. You can check out my whole reply and add your own in the discussion boards, and again, that link in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I should also say that one good way to put too much pressure on a trip to Europe is to think of it as your only trip. Unless the doctor has diagnosed you with only 3 months to live, I would recommend that you consider that Europe or places of equal size are not someplace that you can see in one trip, and just give yourself the permission to miss some things and see them next time, because you'll probably have a better trip. And that's advice to everyone, not just to Jason and his friends. But if you could go on the discussion boards and tell Jason what one place you would be interested in going to if you had only had one place to go in Europe, that might be something to help them with their trip planning. And apparently, even though I've been doing this show for 3 years, we haven't covered every place. I got a letter from Michelle just a couple weeks ago asking for a show on Ireland, which was good timing because, of course, the next show was on Ireland. She also wrote and said, hope you can find a Scotland interview to do, and also doing Philippines might be interesting sometimes. I don't know when we'll be heading to Ireland, Scotland, probably within the next year. And then I also heard from Paulo. My name is Paulo, and I'm from Brazil. I listen to your podcast. I think it's great. Thank you for the work. I intend to go to the Bahamas, Nassau, in next December, and I'm looking for a podcast about it. There is no episode about it in the Amateur Traveler. Is there? Is there going to be? Do you know a nice podcast about it? I don't know a podcast about it. I don't know if there's going to be. As with Scotland and Philippines, I'll need some help. So if you've been to one of those 3 places, or as well as some of the other places that we've named in the discussion board that people are looking for information about, let me know. Drop me an email at host@amateurtraveler.com. Or leave a comment on this particular episode, because we are winding this episode down. Go to amateurtraveler.com and leave a comment and let me know what you think. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more castle.